Welcome students. Today we are going to throw light on aims and objectives of taxonomy. The term taxonomy has often been used in an incorrect perspective. As a result, it has decayed to the extent of meaning only identification of species. The symptoms of this decay have percolated from biologists to the teachers and even to students. The onus of identifying the plant or animal group invariably comes to the taxonomists. The names provided by them are taken on trust by the recipients without their ever having participated in the decision-making process. Identification is one of the aims of the taxonomy, no doubt, but it is not all. There are subtle, loftier aims of this science. In this context, one has to be aware of the confusion between the different aspects of taxonomy, namely identification, nomenclature, and classification, which could cloud the minds of beginners. The three terms, strictly speaking, refer to three different things, even though in practice they overlap. When one says that the given material is Eucalyptus globulus, it is identified, named, and classified. However, identification means recognition of material as the same as or different from another known entity. Nomenclature involves attributing a name to it, and classifying involves its proper placement in the taxonomic system. Plant taxonomy is a branch of botany that deals with classification, including identification, origin, interpretation, and nomenclature of plants. It is based mainly on the morphology, including anatomy and other allied branches of botany such as embryology, cytology, plant geography, etc. Now, the aims of plant taxonomy are: number one, to know the various kinds of plants on surface of earth with their nomenclature, occurrence, habit and habitat, affinities, economic importance, etc. It should provide a convenient method of identification and communication. Both harmful and useful species are so intimately associated with daily life that it becomes necessary to have an orderly and scientific approach for the study of plants. Number two, to develop a reference system for plants where the scientists can work with a named entity like species, genus, family, etc. Multiple usage of plants in everyday life necessitated formulation of standard terminology for description of various parts as an aid to identification and nomenclature. The basic knowledge of plants is first requirement and provides idea for morphological variations. Number three, to demonstrate the manifold diversity reported in plants and their phylogenetic relationship to evolution of plants. Thus, plant taxonomy aims at providing a classification which is based on natural affinities of organisms as far as possible. Number four, to provide an inventory of plant taxa by means of flora. Next target of plant taxonomy is to provide suitable nomenclature. To every plant a binomial name is given. Number six, modern work is saturated with extensive development of hybrid plants. Hybridization and taxonomy are closely related. Without taxonomic knowledge, it is difficult to identify and compare plants. Number seven, to provide knowledge about natural surroundings, nature of organs, and economic significance. Number eight, agriculture and horticulture are interrelated branches of science and have a direct bearing on taxonomy. Number 9. The identification of fossils is possible only with adequate knowledge of taxonomy. Identification in fossils becomes difficult to their fragmentary and ill-preserved nature. Number 10. Taxonomy is aimed to computerized comparison of characters of different plants, which is highly helpful in classification. Number 11. To provide an integrating and unifying role in the training of biology students, particularly in regard to the relationship between various branches of biology, and prove to be a well-connecting and data-gathering science. Now, we will discuss aspects of taxonomy. The three functions of taxonomy include identification, nomenclature, and classification. Its main aim is to provide a convenient method of identification and communication about a taxa and provide a classification which is based on natural affinities of plants as far as possible. The word taxon was first used by a German biologist, Adolf Meyer, in 1926 for animal groups. It was later proposed for the plant system in 1948 by Hermann J. Lamb. It is a taxonomic group of any rank, for example, family, genus, species, subspecies, etc. Now, we will discuss these three functions of taxonomy: identification, nomenclature, and classification one by one. Number first, identification. Identification of a taxon is a prerequisite for any study based on it. It is the determination of a taxon based on overall similarities and differences with other taxa. Identification is generally done by comparing representative specimen of a given taxon with the help of key descriptions, illustrations, etc. Sometimes the specimen may not agree or compare with the existing predetermined specimen. In such a case, it is taken to be new to science. Identification is thus assignment of additional unidentified plants to a correct rank once a classification has been established. It is the determination of a name for a specimen. This also implies its rank. Now, the characters that are often considered before plant identification. Number 1. Whether a plant is herbaceous or woody and annual or perennial in nature. Number 2. Whether or not milky or colored sap is present in the leaf, stem, or other plant parts. Number 3. The leaf type, phyllotaxy and venation. Number 4. Presence or absence and type of stipule on young shoots. Number 5. The distribution and kinds of surface coverings, that is hairs, trichomes, spines, etc. Number 6. The parts of the flower and the number of sepals and petals, whether separate or fused, and also their arrangement, that is estivation. Number 7. Whether parent is present in one or more series or absent. Number 8. Whether pappus, for example asteraceae, or apicalyx, for example malvaceae, or similar structures are present. Number 9. Whether a nectar secreting disc is present in the flowers, for example rutaceae. Number 10. Whether the flowers are actinomorphic or zygomorphic. Number 11. The number and attachment of stamens and if there is any fusion of anthers or filaments. Number 12. The number of pistils, styles, and stigmas of the gynoecium. Observation of a transverse section of the ovary. The number of locules, number of ovules per locule, and also the placentation. Number 13. The position of the ovary and fusion of the parent by observing a longitudinally cut section of the entire flower through the center. Now, we will discuss second aspect, that is nomenclature. Once the taxon has been identified, it becomes necessary to give it a scientific name. Thus, nomenclature is the naming of a taxon correctly. It is a precise and universal system of rules used by all biologists of the world for naming newly discovered plants. Often, constant study of plants results in differences of opinions concerning past work. This often results in splitting, uniting, changing ranks, etc., all of which may affect the plant's name. Thus, universal rules are needed to determine the correct name for a plant, and the rules for naming the plants are governed by the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature (ICBN). A new name is given to a new taxon. Thus, nomenclature is a process of naming plants based on international rules agreed upon by biologists in order to ensure a stable and uniform system. Earlier, plants were identified by their common names. Now, the question arises, what is a common name and scientific name? Common name is the name given to a plant by people in a particular area or locality. It is the vernacular name or local name. In a multilingual country like India, where there are several languages, almost all plants have local names, which differ from language to language and even from dialect to dialect. Thus, a particular plant may have several names in a particular country. This makes things extremely difficult when a person speaking a different language. Hence, common names have proved to be misleading and inadequate for wider use throughout the country or the whole world. Now, scientific name. Plants should be named in such a way so that it can be used internationally in order to overcome the problems raised by common names. Botanists have given scientific names to all the known plants for international communication. The first problem which they faced while giving scientific names to plants was to select the language which can give a clear-cut meaning and which would not change. Although Latin is a dead language now, it was agreed by botanists of the world that scientific names should be in Latin, particularly for the following three reasons. Firstly, this language is not being used by any country or nation at present. Secondly, most of the European languages are derived from Latin. Thirdly, in the past, European scholars learned their subjects in Latin. It was a widely used language throughout the European countries, and a lot of botanical literature has been written in Latin. Since Europe and particularly Greece has dominated the whole world in the field of science during 1600 to 1850 AD, Latin is now a language of botany and other allied sciences. Now, what is binomial nomenclature? In the early attempts of naming plants, plant names used to be long as a single name used to be followed by one to many descriptive terms or adjectives, giving rise to multiple terms or polynomials, which have been used by many taxonomists, including Linnaeus in his Species Planetarium. And he used additional tribal names for these polynomials. After Linnaeus' system of tribal names, later workers, however, found it more convenient to adopt the binomial system consisting of two Latinized words, a generic name followed by a specific epithet. Thus, in the binomial system, a botanical name of a species is a combination of a generic name and a specific epithet. As for example, the botanical name of sunflower is Helianthus annuus. The first word Helianthus designates the genus of the plant, while the second word annuus designates the species of the genus. Now, origin of generic name. The generic name is usually a noun and singular, which is spelled or written with a capital letter. Generic names have different types of origin. Number one, the genera may be named in honor of a botanist or horticulturist or may be a patron of botany. For example, Linnea has been named in honor of famous botanist Linnaeus. Number two, some generic names are of poetic or mythological origin. For example, Nymphia denotes the lovely water nymphs. Number three, many generic names denote some characteristic features of the plant. For example, Linodendron or lily tree is named after the shape of the flowers of the tulip tree. Number four, there is another category of generic names in which the name is aboriginal in origin. That is, the names existed in the lands where the plants were discovered, but later they were given Latin names. For example, Betula is an old Greek name of berich. Now, origin of specific epithet. The specific epithet is often an adjective and it is written with a small initial letter, unlike the generic name. However, if the specific epithet is derived from common names or from a generic name or from a person's name, the initial letter of the epithet may be a capital letter. In the typed or handwritten material, both the generic name and the specific epithet should be underlined, while if printed, it should be in italics or boldface. Like a generic name, a specific epithet may also have several origins. Number one, it may be in honor of a person. Number two, it may be derived from some special characteristic of the plant. Number three, it may be derived from a geographical location where the plant grows. Number four, it may originate from an old common name. Number five, it may be named arbitrarily. Now, third aspect is classification. Plant classification is the arrangement of the plants into groups and categories for a clear understanding, proper study, and effective organization. According to Radford in 1986, classification is the arrangement of groups of plants with particular circumscriptions by rank and position according to artificial criteria, phenetic similarities, or phylogenetic relationships. The early civilization of India, Egypt, and China, who had a fair knowledge of plants used both as food as well as for medicinal purposes, also practiced a sort of plant taxonomy. Rishi Ayurveda, compiled by Parasara before the beginning of the Christian era, is one of the earliest Indian work which deal with plants in a scientific manner and follows a classification largely based on comparative morphology of plants, and it was considered to be more advanced than the ones developed in Europe before the 18th century. A classification system has predictive value and provides an index to information storage and retrieval on the plants. Since systematics today is very much a reflection of the past, a historical review revealing the historical period and the technologies available during the historical periods needs to be summarized. Types of classification. The past taxonomic literature described three types of systems of classification. These include the artificial system, natural system, and phylogenetic system. However, Radford in 1986 has described fourth type of classification, that is mechanical classification. Now, we will discuss them one by one. Number one, artificial classification. The earliest system of classification which remained dominant from 300 BC up to about 1830 were artificial systems, which were based on one or a few easily observable characters of plants such as habit, like trees, shrubs, herbs, etc., or floral characters, particularly the number of stamens and carpels. Such type of classification using some arbitrary or at least easily observable characters, often irrespective of their affinity, is called artificial. The sexual system of Linnaeus is a good example of artificial classification, which uses only one attribute, that is, the number of stamens, for grouping plants into 24 classes, as a result of which various unrelated taxa, which are not at all related but similar in one respect only, have been placed under the same class. Number two, natural classification. These systems of classification are based upon overall resemblances, mostly in gross morphology, utilizing as many taxonomic characters as possible to group taxa. Charles Darwin's proposed theory of evolution in 1859 postulates that the present-day plants have descended from those existing in the ancient past through a series of modifications in response to changing environmental conditions, which means that all present-day plants are related to each other in one way or another. Thus, the closely related plants should naturally be grouped together. This is called natural classification. Thus, larger the number of characters shared by different taxa, the more closely related they are to each other. This is the basis of modern classification. The best known natural system of classification is that of Bentham and Hooker. They divided seed plants into three groups: dicotyledons, gymnospermy, and monocotyledons. Dicotyledons were further divided into three subgroups like polypetally, gamopetally, and monoclamidy. Number three, phylogenetic classification. The classification system proposed after Darwin's theory are mostly phylogenetic. That is, they use as many taxonomic characters as possible in addition to the phylogenetic or evolutionary interpretations. These are expressed in the form of phylogenetic trees or shrubs, showing presumed evolution of the groups. The natural system is two-dimensional, that is based on the data available at any time and is known as horizontal classification, whereas the addition of the third dimension, that is past history and ancestral history, results in phylogenetic classification, also known as vertical classification or evolutionary classification. John Hutchinson classification is one of the known phylogenetic system of classification. He divided flowering plants into two phyla. Number one, gymnospermy, and number two, angiospermy. Angiospermy was further divided into two subphyla. Number one, dicot and monocot. Dicot was further divided into two divisions. Number one, lignosi and herbaceae. Monocot was also subdivided into three divisions: calciferae, coroliferae, and glomiferae. According to Radford in 1986, apart from the above three types, one more type of classification is mechanical classification. Mechanical classification system use one or a few selected taxonomic characters to group taxa. For example, systems of Andrea Casalpino, Caspar Bowen, John Ray, J.P. Tournefort, and Carlos Linnaeus. Now, we will discuss scope of taxonomy. The scope of plant taxonomy is diverse. It is benefiting not only botanists but also to those who are working in other fields where plants are used as tools. Plant taxonomy, being multidisciplinary in nature, has close links with morphology, anatomy, embryology, palynology, paleobotany, cytology, genetics, evolution, physiology, molecular biology, chemistry, geography, ecology, remote sensing, and computer sciences. Some of the main uses of plant taxonomy is as follows. Number 1. The systematic botany is of great use in forestry. Every type of tree of the forest must be named and classified. At the same time, the characteristic features, distribution, and abundance of the plants must be learned. Number 2. The study of systematic botany is also essential in agriculture and horticulture. To get resistant varieties of crops, etc., the crossing is needed, which is furnished by foreign seeds and plants. The foreign seeds and plants are introduced by the men who have sufficient knowledge of systematic botany. Number 3. To study the plant ecology, the knowledge of systematic botany becomes essential. The plant ecologist must be knowing the names of the plants and their relationships to habitat and environment. The character of the soil of a land area may easily be judged by the vegetation grown there. Ecologists having basic knowledge of the plant taxonomy find it easy to choose suitable plants to be raised as soil binders to check desertification, fast-growing trees for afforestation, mineral-indicated plants for mineral exploration, energy plantation as a renewable source of energy, raising dust filter plants to check air pollution, environmental assessment, etc. Number 4. The study of systematic botany is of great use in tracing the origin of plants. The fossils scattered here and there in fragments are found to be very useful in tracing out the characters of the ancestral forms of the plants. The study of these fossils requires the sound knowledge of systematic botany. Systematics is also useful in protection of human health. Exact identification of insects helps in controlling the epidemic disease. For example, many diseases like malaria, filaria, dengue fever, kala azar, etc. are spread by different species of mosquitoes. It also helps in conserving the useful animals and plants. Systematics helps us in tracing out the indicator organisms like presence of certain organisms provide important information. For example, presence of protozoan Colipedium indicates the degree of pollution in water. All the pharmaceutical studies are based on the work of taxonomists. Dear students, this is all about aims and objectives of taxonomy. Thank you very much.